Steve Andreas, Six Blind Elephants, page 242. However, if we are to ask, what is the meaning of my life to the postman, I would get a very different answer. Then I am someone to whom he delivers mail, one of many people who provide a reason for his job and a livelihood. So my life doesn't have a single large meaning. It has many meanings to many different people, depending on my place in their life. Having found ways in which my life has meaning for others, that has meaning for me. I am someone who has been important to others. So, while I can't find meaning in my life reflexively and directly, I can find a wealth of meaning indirectly by realizing how my life has had meanings for others. When I add together all these meanings, I can find the meanings of my life, a very useful and important category. If you think of all people you have contacted or influenced in any way, including all those whom you never met, like the people who have made, shipped, stocked, and sold the paper clips you bought last month, you have provided a lot of meanings for many different people. In the classic film It's a Wonderful Life, in the classic film It's a Wonderful Life, George Bailey is depressed and on the brink of suicide because of an impending business failure. When an angel shows him what his small town would have been like if he hadn't been born at all, and all his good deeds over the years had never happened. If you have lived your life according to your values and what is important to you, you have had a positive impact on many people, most of whom you have never met. Your life doesn't have a meaning, it has many meanings, and the sum of all those meanings is considerable. If you think of all those meanings at once, you can have an experience of that goes far beyond just words. I like to close my eyes and imagine that I can see all the people that I have affected in my life so far, both directly and indirectly. Nearer to me are my family and closer friends whom I impacted most. A little farther away are students, casual friends, and people that I know somewhat. Then there are the grocery clerks and others who I might barely recognize on the street. Beyond those are all the other people that I have affected, and the people who were affected by the people that I affected, friends of friends, spouses of students, and an immense crowd, widening toward a distant horizon. There is a way of using what you have learned to create an experience of an immense category, utilizing aggregate scope to provide a meaning that will still be with you on your deathbed. when everything you have had is about to be taken away. Summary. Meaning is a result of the scopes of experience we attend to and how we categorize them. But most of all, it results from the ways we link those scopes together and its relevance to what is important to us. The atoms and molecules of meaning provided by scopes and categories can be combined into larger molecules of meaning. Cause-effect, equivalence, and context. These in turn can be combined into even larger structures of meaning in the ongoing sequence of our living. When we encounter unpleasant meanings, we can always examine a short segment of this flow and slow it down or repeat it in order to discover how we are creating the meaning that we don't like. Understanding what we are doing often suggests alternatives to try. When we attend to only a small part of our experience and have only a few ways to categorize it, that leaves us with very few options for meaning, and some of these will take us into endless questioning circles of dead ends. When we attend to only a small part of our experience and have only a few ways to categorize it, that leaves us with very few options for meaning, and some of these will take us into endless questioning circles or dead ends. But when we understand that we always use only a small part of the scopes available to us, only a few of the available categories, and only some of the ways of putting them together, we can realize that there are many other possibilities for creating a meaning that we like better. When you offer someone else or yourself a new choice of meaning, it can be useful to first loosen the meaning they or you already have. What has sometimes been called deframing. Then you can offer new content in the same form of meaning as they are now using, or offer new content in a different form of meaning, expanding their options. When you offer someone a new meaning, your voice, tone, timing, personal congruence, etc. are important factors in its impact. How well it is received and considered. When we think about the more general meaning of our lives, we find that questions like, "What is the meaning of my life?" omit almost all the ingredients that make meaning possible. Meaning for whom, in what context, with what consequences, in relation to what outcomes, as measured by what criteria. Without those ingredients, meaning is not possible. So it is not possible for me to reflexively find meaning for myself directly. But if we add these missing elements into the question, it is quite easy to find meanings that we have for others. Then we can find meaning for ourselves in the meaning that we have had for others. A basic for a stable meaning that can carry us through difficult times. In the context, 2 chapters I want to explore In the next 2 chapters, I want to explore how we can use our knowledge of scope and category to improve our understanding and our lives by recategorizing events in order to give them a new and more satisfactory meaning. I am an old man and have suffered through a great many troubles, most of which never actually happened. Mark Twain. Oh, what a wise man, this Mark Twain. Chapter 12. Recategorization. Changing bundles. Inside bundles. A chicken and a pig are passing a restaurant where they see a sign in the window that says, "Ham and eggs, donations wanted." The chicken says to the pig, "Let's go in and make a donation." The pig says, "Look, for you, it's a donation. For me, it's a total commitment." Yes, indeed. In the science fiction novel Babel 17th, the protagonist is a linguist who is fluent in over 80 very different languages. When she is faced with a problem that she can't solve, she translates her understanding of the situation into another language, and then another, and another, until she finds a language in which the description makes a solution apparent. Mathematicians do much the same kind of thing when they transform a mathematical expression in a variety of ways, according to established rules and procedures, until it is in a form in which it is easier to solve or understand, or yields insights into other problems. Earlier, we explored how a scope change alone, smaller, larger, overlapping, or different, can result in a recategorization. Change in scope is a content-free intervention because any categorization emerges completely out of that person's values, criteria, assumptions, etc. This avoids the possibility of imposing someone else's values, criteria, or assumptions. You can also directly or indirectly suggest a recategorization that you think might be more useful. This is not a content-free intervention because any recategorization comes from outside the person and always carries some values, criteria, or assumptions with it. This can often be very useful because the client might never think of a useful recategorization on their own. However, when offering a recategorization, you need to be very careful to check that the client finds it appropriate and useful. Since most words refer to categories, simply changing the words that you use to describe or define an experience is one way to change how it is categorized. Usually, it is most effective to redescribe problem events in ways that emphasize strengths rather than weaknesses. Stubbornness can be described as a strong ability to stand firm on things. Passive can be redescribed as being respectful of others' needs. Stubbornness can be described as a strong ability to stand firm on things. Yes. Passive can be redescribed as being respectful to others' needs, etc. This process was prominent in the work of Virginia Satir and is a major focus of strength-based or solution-focused approaches. However, sometimes a client doesn't realize that something that they think of as good solution is actually a serious problem that causes them a lot of difficulties. In that case, redescribing it as a problem can be useful in motivating them to change it. An authoritarian parent who is always telling their kids what to do may be chagrined to realize that they are teaching their kids to obey outside authority, rather than developing the kinds of stable internal values that the parent believes are so important. You can recategorize an experience in a variety of different ways, and these are some additional categories of what have been called reframing, or the NLP sleuth of mouth patterns. Logical levels can help us understand how these patterns differ and how they work. In this chapter, we will explore how you can recategorize an event at the same logical level. You can go inside a category and describe a subcategory at a more specific logical level, or you can go even deeper to a specific example of a category. In the following chapter, we will explore how to recategorize at a more general logical level, one of the most flexible and powerful kinds of recategorization. Recategorization at the same logical level. Redescription is the most commonly used reframing pattern, replacing an existing categorization with a new one at the same logical level. When an experience is recategorized, your response to it often changes. For instance, the next time you introduce your parent to someone, try saying, "This is my bride," or "groom," and notice the response in both your parent and the person you are introducing her to. When someone has a problem, they often describe their feelings as bad. It can be very useful to point out that these unpleasant feelings are actually useful and good, because they signal a problem that needs to be attended to. If they didn't have the unpleasant feelings to warn them, they might ignore the problem and suffer the consequences. Changing the description from bad to unpleasant can redirect their attention from simply trying to eliminate the feelings to solving the problem that causes the feelings. In a couple therapy session, the husband describes his wife as having been promiscuous before they were married, a description that she found objectionable. wrinkling her nose and shaking her head. I said to her, "I can see that you don't like the word promiscuous. Would it be better to say that you were active?" She mouthed the word active silently to herself, as if tasting it, and then nodded and said, "Yes, active." When we would call to our youngest son in the morning to wake him up for school, we was understandably a bit annoyed at having to get up when he would rather sleep. Once a friend of his was visiting, and somehow it came up that we would call to him in the morning to wake him up. She said with great enthusiasm, "Whoa, you have a personal human alarm clock. That's so much nicer than being awakened by a machine." That redirected his attention from the fact of being awakened to how it was done, a change in scope as well as category, and he was much more cheerful in the morning after that redescription. For many years, doctors, parents, and hypnotherapists have offered children money in order to buy their warts, and very often the warts fall off soon afterward. The offer to buy a wart implicitly recategorizes it from being an abnormal growth or disease or part of the body to being something that can be exchanged for money and transferred to someone else. Without knowing how this happens physiologically, it apparently works as a result of this recategorization. I have often wondered if redescribing cancer and other diseases as a temporary cellular imbalances might have similar useful effects. Whenever people attempt to lose weight, they have to use up fat reserves, and this inevitably causes feeling of hunger, which are inherently unpleasant sensations. Far more important is how someone categorizes those sensations. If they think of it as starvation or denying themselves the pleasure of eating, or as punishment for eating too much in the past, that kind of categorization adds unpleasantness to the already unpleasant sensations of hunger, making it much harder to lose weight. However, feelings of hunger can also be categorized in many other ways that make losing weight much easier. Hunger results from low blood sugar, so it is a sign that you are actually losing weight now, already succeeding in using up fat reserves, already making progress in becoming more healthy and fit. Hunger is a dependable sign that your abs are getting flatter, your waist is a bit slimmer, and that you have a little more energy because you have less weight to carry around. Every bit of hunger that you feel is also an indication of your strength and willpower, your tenacity in staying with an unpleasant task in order to reach future benefits. Using any one of these pleasant categorizations make it much easier to continue to lose weight, and using them all as I have just done creates a more powerful new category with an aggregate categorical scope. Years ago, when abortion was illegal and as a result quite dangerous, Milton Erickson counseled a young couple who were planning to have an abortion. He tried many ways to persuade them not to, but they were adamant. Just as they left his office, he said to them, "Whatever you do, don't name your unborn child." And as a result, they decided against abortion. Why did this work? When all Erickson's previous attempts had failed. Baby is defined in many dictionaries as a human being from birth to 1 year, but child is defined as from birth to puberty. Naming a child creates an image of an individual human being, and the scope of that image could go into the future as far as puberty. Since Erickson and the couple had been in opposition throughout the counseling, he could expect that they would also oppose his last statement, a negative command, and name the child. Thinking of the pregnancy in this way made it much more likely that they would keep the child. And of course, that is why opponents of abortion always speak of killing a baby or an unborn child. Since pregnancy includes a scope of time from conception to birth, and fetus is defined as from 2 months to birth, proponents of a woman's rights to choose abortion would be wise to avoid those words and instead speak of ending a zygote, morula, blastula, or gastrula, medically and scientifically specific terms for different stages of very early pregnancy. Many problems exist because all involved are staying within a certain kind of description that makes a solution difficult. The problem can be solved much more easily when it is described differently. For instance, Salvador Minichin was seeing a family in which a 10-year-old boy was sniffing gasoline. Minichin said, "I understand you like to sniff gasoline. What do you think you are, an automobile?" The whole family relaxed a little at this joking recategorization of the boy as a machine, and the serious problem became a bit less serious and easier to solve. Less obvious is that Minichin recategorized the boy's behavior as a result of the boy's likes, "you like too," rather than as a mysterious compulsion or other deviant motive. Then Minichin goes on to say, "Which do you prefer, unleaded or regular?" Amplifying his categorization of the behavior as a resulting from his preferences. Then Minichin smells and takes a sip of the herb tea he has been holding and says, "I wonder what kind of tea this is." Then he turns to the boy, holds out his cup and says, "Since you have a good nose, Tell me, what kind of tea this is?" Minichin put the boy in a position of having a good nose, able to determine what kind of tea it was better than Minichin could. This changed the categorization of his behavior from deviance to competence, at the same time that it reversed the typical presumed categorical roles of the superior therapist and inferior client. It reversed the typical presumed categorical roles of the superior therapist and inferior client. At other times, Minichin would redescribe deviance as being incompetence. Another boy had been repeatedly caught selling and using drugs at school. After making a long list of the many different times that the boy had been caught, Minichin said, "I'm very worried about you, because you don't seem to be very good at this." At other times, Minichin would redescribe a deviance as being incompetence. Another boy had been repeatedly caught selling and using drugs at school. After making a long list of the many different times that the boy had been caught, Minichin said, "I'm very worried about you, because you don't seem to be very good at this." "You are very likely to go to prison for a long time, and it is very rough in there. I don't think you will survive that." The boy responded by looking quite startled. Clearly, he had not thought of this aspect of his behavior. He had probably expected a lecture about how bad drugs are. But Minichin instead focused on the boy's incompetence and the probable results of that in the future, as a reason for perhaps considering some other profession. The long list of times that the boy had been caught created an aggregate scope that supported the recategorization, which was followed by considering the consequences, a change in scope. Carl Whittaker, one of the developers of family therapy, once demonstrated family therapy with a divorced couple with a teenage son who lived with the mother. The mother was very animated and sexy as she spoke at some length about how wonderful the son was. The mother was very animated and sexy as she spoke at some length about how wonderful the son was, how she confided in him and talked to him about her problems, and what a good relationship she had with him. Just after she had mentioned yet another way in which she and her son got along so well, Whittaker said to the mother, as he gestured first toward the mother and then to the son, "So your second marriage worked out much better than your first one," gesturing toward the father. The mother looked as if her brain had completely stopped working for several seconds. Clearly, she had never thought of her relationship with her son as a marriage, and from now on it will be impossible for her not to. When the mother vehemently disagreed with the idea of her relationship with her son as a marriage, Whittaker replied, "Yes, well, I am not available either. A very interesting communication that at first glance seems to be irrelevant and completely off the wall. Before reading on, stop and see if you can discover the very relevant meaning in Whittaker's response.